In October of 1961, at a county livestock sale outside of Tupelo, Mississippi, a 34-year-old woman named Elsie Harrow paid $82 for 5 Pineywoods cattle that the auctioneer called, right in front of everyone, a lot best suited for somebody with extra grass and low expectations. That was his polite version. The men leaning on the rail had already said worse. The cattle were narrow-hipped, rough-backed, and old-looking in a way that made them seem left behind by the century. 3 cows, 1 young heifer, 1 bull with a scarred shoulder and a habit of keeping his head low. They were not the square, fast-growing beef animals that buyers wanted in 1961. They did not look like a feedlot future. They did not look like money. They looked like trouble. Elsie Harrow stood alone near the back wall of the sale barn, wearing a faded brown coat with a broken cuff button, holding a bid card that one of the clerks had handed her, only after asking twice whether she was bidding for her husband. She said no both times. When the bidding opened, nobody moved. At $50, a man laughed and said the hides might bring that much if you could get them skinned before winter. Elsie raised her card. At $60, another buyer looked at her as if she had misunderstood the lot number. She raised it again. At $82, the auctioneer dropped the hammer because he was afraid no one else was going to rescue him from the silence. Elsie Harrow had bought 5 cattle that the market had already sentenced, and before sunset that same day, half the county had decided what it meant. A widow had wasted good money. A woman trying to run a hill farm alone had gotten sentimental. The Harrow place, already too old-fashioned, had finally slipped backward for good. Her cousin Roy said it clearest that week at the gin office. He said, "Those cattle are fence post money. You buy them when you have given up on making beef." Roy was wrong about the cattle. But that was not the dangerous part. The dangerous part was that almost everyone agreed with him. To understand why Elsie lifted that card, you have to understand the farm she came from. The Harrow farm sat on 186 acres of red clay, pine shade, creek bottom, and thin pasture in the hills of Lee County, land her grandfather Jude Harrow had bought in pieces between 1894 and 1912. Jude had not been a large farmer. He had been a careful one. He kept corn where corn would stand, cattle where cattle could travel, and debt outside the house whenever humanly possible. He wrote everything down. Calves born, calves lost, fence wire, salt blocks, seed, wagon repair, milk sold, bull service, doctoring, weather. Every year had its own column. Every mistake got a number. When Elsie was a girl, she used to sit at the end of the kitchen table while her father, Samuel Harrow, ran a pencil down the ledger and explained the difference between a farm that looked prosperous and a farm that could survive. He told her that prosperity was what people saw from the road. Survival was what the ledger knew. The Harrows had kept Pineywoods cattle since Jude's time, not because the breed was fashionable. It had never been fashionable. Pineywoods cattle were old Gulf stock, descended from the kind of cattle that could handle heat, ticks, brush, drought, bad fencing, and poor men. They gave enough milk to matter. They made enough beef to sell. They did not need rich feed to stay alive. They were not impressive animals if the only thing you measured was speed, but Samuel Harrow measured other things. He measured how many calves hit the ground without a vet. He measured how many cows held weight in August. He measured how many years a breeding cow could stay useful. He measured how much cash left the farm when nothing had gone wrong except the weather. In 1946, after a summer when 3 neighbors lost calves to fever and parasites, Samuel wrote a line in the ledger that Elsie never forgot. "The new cattle grow faster. These cattle stay." He underlined the last word once. By 1959, Samuel Harrow was dying from a lung condition that had made every winter harder than the one before. The herd had already been reduced because he no longer had the strength to manage it properly. He kept 6 cows and 1 old bull. But the line was thinning out. Too much related blood, too few choices. Too many neighbors selling off their scrub cattle for modern beef breeds with clean coats and better market weights. That winter, Samuel sat with Elsie at the table after supper, the ledger open between them, and told her something that sounded like a warning. He said, "When the whole county starts buying the same answer, the first man who needs a different answer will be alone." Elsie wrote that down on the inside cover. Samuel died in March of 1960. He left Elsie the farm, the herd, the ledger, and a kind of knowledge that had no certificate attached to it. She knew how to read a cow across a pasture. She knew the difference between thin from neglect and thin from type. She knew a bad foot before it became a lame animal. She knew which cows raised a calf without drama, and which ones made a person pay for every pound. So when she heard in the summer of 1961 that the Barlow estate was liquidating one of the last Pineywoods herds left in that part of Mississippi, she did not wait for the sale notice. She drove 28 miles in her father's truck and asked to see the cattle. The Barlow boys thought she was wasting their time, but they let her through the gate. She spent nearly 3 hours in that pasture with a notebook in her pocket. She did not look for the biggest animal. She looked for the ones standing square, the ones with good feet, the ones that moved easily through wet ground, the ones with calves that looked better than the cows did. One heifer caught her eye, red-sided, white along the back, deep through the middle, short-horned, quiet but not dull. She walked through a cutover patch that should have made her pick her feet carefully, and she crossed it like she had been built for that exact piece of ground. Elsie marked that heifer in her notebook. She went home and compared what she had seen against her grandfather's old entries from 1917, 1922, and 1931. Different hands had written the notes. Same kind of animal. By the time she arrived at the sale barn in October, Elsie was not gambling. The county saw a widow spending $82 on cattle nobody wanted. Elsie saw the last usable branch of a bloodline that could keep her farm independent. That is why the laughter missed her. It was aimed at a woman making an impulse buy. But that woman did not exist. The first winter tested everything. The 5 cattle from the sale came home poor, wormy, and suspicious. Elsie put them in the east pasture where the creek bent away from the clay bank and the grass held length. She did not pamper them. She did not have money to pamper them. She gave them hay when the ground froze, minerals when she could afford them, and distance when they needed to settle. She kept the bull through one breeding season, then sold him for slaughter before his shoulder could become someone else's problem. She kept the red-sided heifer. She named her Barlow Rose in the ledger, though she never called her that in the field. In the field, she just clicked her tongue, and the heifer came. By 1964, Rose had raised 2 calves without trouble. By 1966, Elsie had 10 Pineywoods cattle on the place. By 1969, she had 16. Every Sunday after supper, she wrote the numbers down. Birth date, dam, sire, if known, weaning weight, summer condition, doctoring, feed bought, calf sold, milk traded, fence repair, cash in, cash out. The entries were not dramatic. That was the point. In the first 9 years after the auction, Elsie spent $176 on veterinary work for the cattle. That included 1 difficult birth in 1965, a wire cut on a young steer in 1967, and a farm call in 1969, when a coughing calf scared her and then recovered before the medicine had any real chance to matter. $176 in 9 years. Roy Harrow's operation, by then, looked better from the road. He had borrowed to buy registered Hereford cows, and later crossed into Charolais because bigger calves were bringing attention at the sale ring. His pastures were cleaner. His fences were newer. His animals looked like magazine cattle when they were turned out after a rain. But magazine cattle still got sick in Mississippi heat. Pink Eye moved through his calves twice. Worm loads ate into weight gain. Hoof rot found the wet ground below the north slope. He bought feed earlier in the fall than Elsie did because his cattle lost condition faster when the grass turned poor. None of this ruined him. Not then. It just took a little money, then a little more, then a little more after that. The kind of money a man does not notice leaving because each check has a reason attached to it. Elsie noticed checks. She had been trained by a ledger that did not care how reasonable a purchase sounded. In 1970, Dr. Marcus Bell, the local veterinarian, came to the Harrow place for a neighbor's dog that had been hit on the road and wandered under Elsie's porch. After handling the dog, he walked the east pasture with her because he had heard about her cattle and wanted to see if the talk was exaggerated. It was not. He looked through the ledger in the kitchen while Elsie poured coffee. He turned back 3 years, then 5, then 8. Finally, he said, "You are either the luckiest woman in Lee County, or these cattle are making fools of the rest of us." Elsie said, "Maybe they are just making cows." That line went farther than the laughter had. Not fast, not loudly, but steadily. A farmer 2 roads over asked if she would sell a heifer. A man from Pontotoc County asked about a young bull. A retired dairyman from Itawamba came to look and stayed half the afternoon, studying the herd through the fence like he was trying to remember something the industry had trained him to forget. Elsie sold a few animals, but never the ones she needed. She did not expand because people were interested. She expanded when the grass could carry it. By 1975, the Harrow herd stood at 24 cattle. The farm had no mortgage, no operating loan, no new tractor note, no feed account running past 30 days. Elsie still drove Samuel's 1952 Chevrolet pickup, which burned oil in cold weather and needed a rag tied around the inside door handle to keep it from rattling loose. Roy told people she was living too small, and from the road, maybe she was. He had 80 head by then, a new squeeze chute, 2 hired boys in summer, and a line of credit at the bank that the banker treated like a sign of ambition. Beef prices had been good enough to make expansion feel like wisdom. Land values were rising. Equipment dealers were friendly. Everybody knew a man had to get bigger if he did not want to get left behind. That was the wind of the 1970s. It blew through banks, sale barns, county meetings, coffee shops, and kitchen tables. It made debt sound like courage. It made caution sound like fear. It made an old breed of cattle look like an old woman's habit. Elsie heard the wind. She just did not build her farm out of it. The hard years did not arrive all at once. They came the way bad weather comes when the first cloud does not look large enough to fear. Interest rates rose. Feed costs tightened. Cattle prices softened when too many men needed cash at the same time. Land that had seemed to climb forever stopped climbing. Then it started falling. Banks that had once used the word growth began using the word exposure. In 1982, Roy Harrow sold 31 cows because the note demanded it, not because the grass demanded it, not because the herd had failed, because paper had become heavier than cattle. The sale did not clear what he owed. By the spring of 1983, the county had a new sound in it. Auctioneers selling not just equipment, but histories, hay rings, trucks, pasture gates, kitchen freezers, mineral feeders, tractors with children's initials scratched into old paint. Land that had carried the same family name since before the First World War was measured into tracts and offered to men who did not know where the wet holes were. Elsie's farm was not untouched by the crisis. No farm was. Her beef brought less. Hay cost more. A dry spell in August took the shine off the creek pasture. She sold fewer breeding animals because men were afraid to buy anything that could not pay them back by Christmas. But her expenses had nowhere dramatic to fall from. In 1983, her total cattle operating cost was $3,940. Her cattle income was $5,870. Her vet bill was $27 for one farm call and a bottle of something Dr. Bell said she probably did not need, but took anyway because he had driven out. That year, Roy's interest alone cost more than Elsie spent running her cattle. That is when old jokes began dying without anyone admitting they had killed them. In February of 1984, the 96 acres bordering Elsie's north fence went to auction. The land had belonged to the Larkin family. Their bottom pasture touched her creek line, and their ridge pasture had a stand of native grass her father had once said would carry cattle better than it had any right to. The Larkins had not been fools. They had expanded in a time when the bank encouraged expansion, when everyone said land was safer than cash, when a man who hesitated looked like he lacked nerve. Then the numbers turned. The land stayed in the same place, but the paper moved against them. The auction was held on a cold Saturday morning with frost still in the shade. Speculators from Memphis came in clean trucks. Local farmers came in work coats, most of them with no intention of bidding. Roy was there too, standing near the fence, his hands deep in his pockets. Elsie came in Samuel's pickup. She wore the same brown coat she had worn to the cattle sale 23 years earlier. The cuff button was still gone. The bidding opened at $500 an acre. It rose to $640. A man from Memphis bid $675. Elsie bid $700. The man looked back at her once. He bid $725. Elsie bid $750. No one laughed. The auctioneer gave the field one last chance, then brought the hammer down. 96 acres at $750 an acre. $72,000. Elsie walked to a folding table beside the lane and wrote a check. The silence that followed was different from the silence in the sale barn in 1961. That first silence had been contempt wearing work boots. This one was arithmetic. Men were adding 23 years of wrong assumptions and coming up short. Roy found her beside the truck after the deed papers were signed. For a long moment he did not speak. Then he said, "Sam would have liked seeing this." Elsie looked across the frost toward the north fence and said, "Daddy already saw it. He just saw it early." Roy nodded once. That was as close to an apology as he knew how to get. Elsie farmed the combined 282 acres for another 15 years. She did not suddenly become large. She became more stable. That was different. The herd rose to 37 cattle at its highest. She kept the old rules: breed only what the land could carry, sell what did not fit, keep the cows that did quiet work, write down every cost, even when the cost made you look smart, especially then. By the late 1980s, small farmers from outside Mississippi were calling about Pineywoods breeding stock. Some were interested in heritage breeds. Some were tired of cattle that needed grain, medicine, and perfect fencing to do what cattle had once done on rough land. Some wanted a story. Elsie did not sell them a story. She sold cattle. And if she sensed a buyer wanted rarity more than responsibility, she did not sell at all. In 1990, a livestock conservation field researcher named Ann Calder visited the Harrow farm. She had heard that an old Pineywoods line still existed there, with records reaching back before the Depression. Elsie let her look through the herd first, and the ledger second. Anne spent 2 days at the kitchen table. She read Jude Harrow's early entries. She read Samuel's 1946 note. She read Elsie's first auction entry from 1961. 5 Pineywoods cattle, Barlow estate sale, $82. 3 cows, 1 heifer, 1 bull. Thin condition, useful feet, worth keeping. Anne copied those words into her own field notebook. What caught her attention was not just the lineage, it was the cost record. From the fall of 1961 through the end of 1990, Elsie's recorded veterinary expense for the Pineywoods herd totaled $884. Across nearly 3 decades, through herd growth, drought years, hard winters, births, injuries, and ordinary farm trouble, The numbers stayed small enough to be unbelievable until the ledger made it boring. That was the power of it. Not miracle, not luck, not romance. Documentation. A thing the market had dismissed as backward had quietly kept proving itself one Sunday entry at a time. Elsie's great-nephew, Daniel Harrow, started spending summers on the farm in 1991 when he was 13. At first he came because his mother wanted him out of town and away from trouble. Elsie gave him the kind of work that ruins lazy ideas about country life. Hay hooks, water lines, fence staples, mineral tubs, mud up to the ankle, heat that made a shirt stick to the back before breakfast. But Daniel stayed. By 15, he could tell when a cow was off feed before anyone else noticed. By 16, he could read the ledger well enough to know which calves only looked good and which calves were actually worth keeping. By 18, he understood the farm was not old because Elsie had failed to modernize it. It was old because the old parts still worked. In 1997, Elsie asked him whether he wanted the farm. She did it while they were repairing a gate hinge in the north pasture. No ceremony, no speech. She asked the question as if she were asking whether the lower wire needed tightening. Daniel said yes. She made him wait 1 year before she believed him. Then, in 1998, she signed the farm over to him with a herd of 34 Pineywoods cattle, 282 acres paid for, and ledgers that began with Jude Harrow's stiff handwriting in the 1890s and ended, for the moment, with Elsie's small, narrow script. The deed transfer entry was simple. 282 acres, Lee County, Mississippi, transferred to Daniel Samuel Harrow, paid for. Keep writing. Elsie spoke publicly about the farm only once. It was at a county agriculture meeting in 1999, in a low-ceiling room behind a church fellowship hall, where the coffee had been sitting too long and the folding chairs scraped every time someone shifted. She was 72 years old. She stood at the front with no notes. She said she had bought the cattle in 1961 because the market had confused speed with strength. She said speed had its place. Then she said strength had to be measured across bad years, not good ones. She told the room that her Pineywoods cattle had saved her more money by not getting sick than some men had made by chasing heavier calves. She said a veterinary bill that never arrives is easy to underestimate because it does not stand in the yard where people can admire it. That line made Dr. Bell laugh from the back row. Then Elsie said the thing that stayed with the people who heard it. She said, "There is money that shouts when it comes in, and money that whispers because it never had to leave." Roy was in the room. His hands were folded around his cap. When Elsie finished, he was the first person to stand. "So what do you see when you look at 5 poor cattle in a Mississippi sale barn in 1961, selling for $82 to a woman the county thought was too stubborn to know the difference between old and useful? Most people saw bad cattle. They saw a widow with a dead father's habits. They saw a breed the market had walked past. They saw slow growth, rough coats, low prestige, and money leaving a purse it should have stayed in. Elsie Harrow saw something else. She saw a cow that could raise a calf on grass that would humble a prettier animal. She saw feet that could hold in red clay. She saw a bloodline that had been selected by heat, brush, weather, and hard years, instead of by men with polished boots and short memories. She saw vet bills that would never be written, feed debt that would never be opened, land that would one day come up for sale when the wind changed direction. She saw the difference between a farm built for applause and a farm built for the morning after prices fall. That is the difference between buying what the market praises and keeping what the land proves. The market is wind. It fills a room. It rattles tin. It makes men speak louder than they think. But a farm does not stand on wind. It stands on roots. And in 1961, while a county laughed at 5 cattle nobody wanted, Elsie Harrow was not buying the past. She was buying roots. The wind moved on. The roots stayed.